How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're starting to have Daled, Daf 4 of Masechta Shevuos. Friends, your friends. Okay, we are continuing. We're kind of like in the middle of a sugya, like we're trying to figure out who's the author of our Mishnah. We're saying, well, it can't be Rabbi Akiva, it can't be Rabbi Yishmael. And then we said, well, it could be Rabbi Yishmael. Now I understand that Rabbi Yishmael says that there's only Korban Olav Yored for Ochal Velo Ochal, and not for Ochalti Velo Ochalti. However, if we say that Rabbi Yishmael explains that our Mishnah is, if we say that the Mishnah is talking about doing it on, violating your Shevuah on purpose and getting makis, well then, already, it could be like Rabbi Yishmael, because Rabbi Yishmael would say you get makis for ochal velo ochal, achalti velo achalti. We're kind of in that stuff, kind of. Yeah, we're like kind of in that stuff, kind of. So now, continuing on that stuff, kind of, where are we? We are about 10 lines, I'd say, into Daf Daled Amid Aleph. The first one on the line is B'mai Ukimta. Okay, we're like in the middle of a sugya, and I mentioned yesterday, like the sugya doesn't really end so much until basically where we're going to stop today. That's at least like a stopping point. And then it's Erev Shabbos now, so I'm getting about as far as I've got. Well, I'm getting as far as I've gotten so far. So tomorrow I'm going to move forward. Okay, where are we? So we are, as I said, about 10 lines into Daf Daled Amid Aleph B'mai Ukimta. You got it? Good. Rabbi Yishmael v'lamalkis. Okay, so we're saying that our Mishnah is authored by Rabbi Yishmael, and that we're talking about makis. Okay, by Shevuos, we're saying, and therefore by Shevuos, and therefore by Shevuos, talking about makis, it's ochal, lo ochal, ochalti, lo ochalti. Maris negoyim, my malkasika. Okay, so if we're saying that the Mishnah is talking about makis, okay, so we explained that by Shevuos, Shtayim Shen Arba, it's makis. Where's the makis by negoyim, by Maris negoyim? Right, Maris negoyim, my makasika. My malkasika. Because it's be'eroso. Well, if he cuts off his tsaras, he's chayiv makis. Uchrab oven, amr be'ila, damr b'oven, amr be'ila, kol mokim, shenemar, hishamer pen ve'al, that whenever the Torah says hishamer, or pen, or al, in ela lo saisei, it's a mitzvah lo saisei that you can get lashes for, and sure enough, by negayim it says hishamer, b'nega tsaras, lishmor me'od v'lasos kol asher yoru eschem kan melvim kasha tzivisim tishmulasos. So it says hishamer by tzaras, and therefore if you cut off your tzaras, whack. Yitzias Shabbos my malkis ika. And what about by Shabbos? Yitzias HaShabbos is talking about hotzah merishus l'rishus on Shabbos. That's a chiyuv skila, not makis. Lav shnitan asoris misas bezdin hu. For being mechal Shabbos, it's misas bezdin. It's not makis, it's skila. V'cholav shnitan asoris misas bezdin ein lo ken olav. And any lav where the punishment is misas bezdin, there's no makis, it's misa. Well, and for the Gemara, says the Gemara, well, mishum hachi mukmina ki Rabbi Yishmael. Well, guess what, says the Gemara. We just learned Masechta Makis. We recently had a discussion in Masechta Makis, a three-way machloikes. Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yitzchok. Is there Makis and Karis? Is there Makis and Misa? Rabbi Yishmael says there's Makis and Misa. That you can be Chayiv Misa and also get Makis. Well, yeah. What were they? Oh gosh, right. What was the maskana of that Gemara? Right. What exactly did they warn him? I can't remember. But he definitely says that there's makis in a case of misa. Rabbi Akiva disagreed, right? Because Kedei Risha also, b'mispar mishum risha achas atam chav v'atam chav mishum shtei rishayos. Therefore, you can't get makis and misa. He explained why you can get makis and karis. Rabbi Yitzchak says no. You only chav karis, not chav makis. But Rabbi Shmuel is the one who says that there's makis and misa. Meaning, you could be chav makis even in the case where there's misas bezdin, even though it's a lav shenitan latzaris misas bezdin. So the Gemara says, well, it just so happens to be, if we remember from Masechta Makis, it's the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel that there can be makis even in an avera that has misas bezdin, and therefore, says the Gemara, I'm reading it again, mishum hachi, this is why kamu kmina ki Rabbi Yishmael. Well, this is point why we're saying that the Mishnah is Rabbi Yishmael, because our Mishnah is talking about makis, and the only way to have makis, and if you're going to say that there's makis by Hotzah Yitzias HaShabbos, you're going to have to say Lav Shenitan Lasaris Misas Bezdin Lokin Alav, and that's the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. Da'amar Lav Shenitan Lasaris Misas Bezdin Lokin Alav. But the Gemara says, 1 second. So you're telling me that, well, this is why we have to say that the Mishnah is Rabbi Yishmael, because we're talking about makis, and Lav Shenitan Lasaris Misas Bezdin, right? And therefore Yitzias HaShabbos, Lav Shenitan Lasaris Misas Bezdin, Lokin Alav, according to Rabbi Yishmael. And if not for that, we would say that the Mishnah is like Rabbi Akiva. We're saying, and this is why, because of Lav Shenitan Lasaris Misas Bezdin, Lokin Alav, we say that the Mishnah is like Rabbi Yishmael, right? That's what it says. Mishum hachi kamuk mina. I'm reading again. Rabbi Yishmael da'amar Lav Shenitan Lasaris Misas Bezdin, Lokin Alav, Frekti Gemara Lav hachi. But if not for this inyan of Lav Shenitan Lasaris Misas Bezdin, Kaimuk Rabbi Akiva, otherwise we would say that the Mishnah is like Rabbi Akiva, but what about Kashi Dias? But what about the fact that there are other problems to say that it's like Rabbi Akiva? For example, Rabbi Akiva says that by Yedias Atuma, he would only say that there's by Helim Tuma, not by Helim Mikdash. So Lav Amar to Bishmael he Vila Malchus, Rabbi Akiva Namin Vila Malchus. To which the Gemara says, wait, what are you getting so excited about by Rabbi Akiva? We explained, right, there were also issues by Shevuos according to Rabbi Shmuel. We explained it by saying, well, it's talking about makis. So say the same thing. If you want to explain the Mishnah like Rabbi Akiva, what about Yedias Atuma, where there would only be 2, there wouldn't be 4, there would only be Helim Tuma and not Helim Mikdash? Well, just say that we're talking about makis, and then there would be makis, by Yedias Atuma as well. We're talking about makis. We're not talking about Korban Ole. V'yardi hachi Yedias hasras mi by lei. But if that's the case, then why are we talking about Yedias, then have Helem, and he knew, and then he forgot? If we're talking about makis, we're talking about hasros. We're warning them. We're saying, don't do it, and he does it anyways. So asros mi by lei. So Allah kasha, it's no problem. Tni Yedios de asros. Say the knowledge of the warnings that he received, and now he gets makis. Yochi shtaim shein arba tarte udahavim. But now the Gemara says, but still it wouldn't make sense, because if we're talking about, we're saying that it's Rabbi Akiva, and what we have issues with Yedias Atuma, we say, well, we're talking about makis, and we're talking about Asra. But if we're talking about Asra, where he was warned, so now he knows that he's Tamei, he knows that he's in the Beis HaMikdash, or that he knows that he's Tamei, he knows that he's eating Kachim, then there's only 2 scenarios. There aren't 4 scenarios anymore. If we're talking about makis, he's being warned. If he's being warned, he knows what's going on. If he knows what's going on, there's only 2 scenarios. Because there were 4 scenarios when we said, well, he forgot that he's Tamei, but he knew that he was in the Beis HaMikdash. He forgot that he was Tamei, but he knew that he was in Kachim. Or he knew that he was Tamei, but he forgot that he was in the Beis HaMikdash. Or he knew that he was Tamei, and he forgot that it was Kachim. So over there's 4 scenarios, but if we're talking about makis, where he's being warned, and therefore he knows that he's Tamei, he knows he's in the Beis HaMikdash, or he knows that he's eating kodshim. Well, then there's only 2 scenarios. There aren't 4 scenarios anymore. Right? So there's only 2 scenarios. There's only 2 possible scenarios. V'su, and more so, as sheyesh ba yedia batchila v'yedia basov ve'elen bein tayim, halom lemalchus ma'avidste. And also the Mishnah starts talking about by yedia satuma, he knew at the beginning, he knew at the end, he forgot in the middle. Why is that relevant to makis? It has nothing to do with makis. Makis, you warn the guy, he does it anyways, you hit him. V'su, and more so, how is it ba'ola v'yored? The Mishnah specifically is talking about Yediyah Satuma for Ole v'yored, for Korbanis. We're not talking about Makis, we're talking about Korbanis. The Mishnah Dafka specifically says Ole v'yored, Korban Ole v'yored. So we're not talking about Makis, we're talking about Korban Ole v'yored, and therefore that basically throws out our whole mahalich. At least that's how I understand it. I think that's the point. It basically throws out the whole mahalich that we've had since yesterday with the whole saying, well, the Mishnah is really Rabbi Yishmael, but it's talking about makis, and it's talking about makis by Shevuos, and it's talking about makis by Tzias HaShabbos, and Lavshnita Ansar says Bezin Loken Alav, and it's talking about makis by Maris Anagoyim. But we'd also have to say that it's talking about makis by Yediyah Satuma, but that's simply not the case. It's talking about Korban Ole v'yored. So therefore, Ela Rav Yosef, therefore rather says Rav Yosef, Rebbe v'nosiv la aliba de tanoi, b'yediyas nosiv la k'rabishma b'shvus nosiv la k'rabakive. So rather, the Mishnah is talking about Korbanis, of course. Korban Ole v'yored. Shevuos Shtayim Shein Arba. There are 2 scenarios of being Korban Ole v'yored, as well as Yediyah Satuma. We're talking about Korban Ole v'yored, but then we have the question: so then who's the Mishnah like? It can't be like Rabbi Akiva, because according to him, there's no Shtayim Shein Arba by Ole v'yored by Yediyah Satuma. According to Rabbi Shmuel, there's no Shtayim Shein Arba by Shevuos for Korban Ole v'yored. So says Rav Yosef that the Mishnah is Rebbe. Rebbe, of course, edited the Mishnah, and he quoted the opinion of Rabbi Akiva when it comes to Shevuos, and therefore it's Shtayim Shein Arba for Korban Ole v'yored, and the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael when it comes to Yediyah Satuma, and that's why there is Shtayim Shein Arba by Yediyah Satuma for Korban Ole v'yored. But the point is, what Rav Yosef is assuming though is that Rebbe doesn't necessarily hold like these opinions. It's not like a Stam Mishnah like these opinions. He quotes the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael for Yediyah Satuma and Rabbi Akiva for Shevuos, but he doesn't necessarily, that's not necessarily his opinion. Amr Rav Ashi Amrisa Lishmait Tekami to Rav Kahana, and says Rav Ashi that he was giving over this sugya and explaining the Mishnah to Rav Kahana, before Rav Kahana, and Rav Ashi says Rav Kahana said to him, Loi Tema Rebbe Nosiv La Liba de Tanoi V'Leilo Svir Leino. Don't say that Rebbe kind of established the Mishnah according to these Tanoim, but he disagrees with them. Ela Rebbe Taime de Nafshe Mefarish. No, Rebbe in the Mishnah was explaining his own opinion, that this was Rebbe's own opinion, that Rebbe agrees that Shevuos Shtayim Shein Arba, there's Korban Ole v'yored, and that Yediyah Satuma Shtayim Shein Arba, there's a Korban Ole v'yored. That's Rebbe's opinion himself. Rebbe holds that way. The Tanya that we learn in the Brisa, Minayin she'eno chayiv elo al sheish b'yediyah batchila v'yediyah basof ve'elam b'intayim. How do we know that for the Korban Ole v'yored, it only applies when there's a Yediyah initially, right? You initially knew that you were Tameh, and at the end, ultimately you knew you were Tameh, but you forgot in the middle, and that's when you went to the Beis Hamikdash, or that's when you ate Kodshim. How do we know that is when you're Chayav a Korban Ole v'yored. When there's a yediyah batchila, yediyah basof, v'helim bein time. How do you know that that is where you're chayiv a korban ola v'yored? So Talmud Lomar v'nelam shnei paimim div Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says because now of course Rabbi Akiva's opinion when it comes to yeah, okay, right, exactly, right, yeah, b'diuk, and this is talking about, exactly, this is talking about Yediyah Satuma, right, so I don't know, of course it's talking about Yediyah Satuma, right, so, and of course Rabbi Akiva's opinion by Yediyah Satuma is that it only applies to Helim Tuma, it does not apply to Helim Mikdash, meaning Rabbi Akiva's opinion is that if he was Tameh and he forgot that he was Tameh, he went to the Beis Hamikdash, or he forgot that he was Tameh and he ate Kodshim, so then he's Chayiv al Korban Olav Yord. But if he knew that he was Tameh and he accidentally went into the Beis Hamikdash or accidentally ate Kodshim, he would not be Chayiv al Korban Olav Yord. And Rabbi Akiva, this is Rabbi Akiva's opinion. So the Brisa says, how do we know that you're Chayiv when there's a Yediyah Batchila and a Yediyah Basof and Helim Bein Tayim? So Rabbi Akiva, whose opinion is that you only Chayiv Korban Olav Yored by Helim Tuma, not by Helim Mikdash, Kilu Kodesh and Mikdash. So he learns it out because the pasuk says twice Vinelam, right, and once Vihu Yada, right. I'm going to read the psukim. The psukim say, O nefesh asher tiga b'chol davar tamei, O b'nivlas chaya tmeya, O b'nivlas behema tmeya, O b'nivlas sheretz tamei, v'ne'elam mimenu v'hu tamei v'ashem, O ki yiga b'tumas adam l'chol tumas asher yitma ba v'ne'elam mimenu v'hu yada v'ashem. There's some interesting stuff there. It says v'ne'elam twice. It says Vihu Yada once. It also says Vihu Tameh, right? It says V'ne'elam mimenu Vihu Tameh v'ashem. This is all Rabbi Akiva's opinion still. How do we piece it all together? Well, the first V'ne'elam, when it says Vihu Ne'elam mimenu Vihu Tameh v'ashem, that is coming to teach that it's Davka He'elim Tuma, right? V'ne'elam mimenu Vihu Tameh v'ashem. It's Davka He'elim Tuma that he's Chayav a Korban Olav Yored for, not He'elim Mikdash. And then when it says V'ne'elam mimenu v'hu yada v'ashem, so that's talking about that V'hu yada is saying that he knew that there was a Yediyah, and then V'ne'elam he forgot about it, and then of course there was a second Yediyah, because if there was no second Yediyah, then how would he know to bring a Korban? He hasn't remembered. He hasn't known the second time. So and then clearly there's a Yediyah Basof, and then he brings a Korban. So that is Rabbi Akiva's opinion, right? So Rabbi Akiva's opinion is that how do we know that there's Yediyah Batchila and Yediyah Basof? Because the first, it says V'ne'elam twice. The first V'ne'elam is to teach that it's only by Helim Tuma, and the second Ne'elam is to say that, and it says V'hu Yada, it's saying that there was a Yediyah, and then he forgot, and then there was another Yediyah. So again, so it says the Brisa of the Tanya, Minayin she'ein chayv el al sheish b'yediyah batchila v'yediyah basof v'helim b'ntayim. How do you know that by Yediyah Satuma you're chayv a korban olav yored when there's a Yediyah at the beginning, a Yediyah at the end, and you forgot there was a lapse in the meantime, in the middle. Tamanol lomar v'ne'elam shnei parim divrei Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva says, because it says v'ne'elam twice, and it's as I explained. The first one is to teach that it's Dafka Helim Tuma, and then it says V'ne'elam v'hu yada, so it means that there was a Yediyah, and then he forgot, and then he remembered again. Okay. Rabbi Omer says, Rabbi Eino Sarich, Hareyu Omer V'ne'elam Michlal Diyada. So says Rabbi, look, obviously Rabbi's aware that the pasuk says V'ne'elam twice. But says Rebbe, when it says V'ne'elam already the first time, V'ne'elam means that he had a lapse, that he forgot. If he forgot, that means that he initially knew. So the fact that it says V'ne'elam already implies Memele that he already knew, v'ne'elam, and then he forgot. And then it says, Vihu yada, and then the pasuk says, Vihu yada, harekan, shtei yediyas. That's your second yediyah. That is how you know that there's yediyah batchila and yediyah basof and helam be'emsa. Because when it says, V'ne'elam, he forgot, that means Memeli already knew. So there's one yediyah, then you forgot. And then it says, Vihu yada, that's your second yediyah. Imkein matamulomar, V'ne'elam. So why does it say V'ne'elam a second time? Because the second V'ne'elam is to say that not only are you chayiv for helim tumah, but also l'chayiv al helim tumah ve'al helim mikdash. Now you're also chayiv for helim mikdash. So we see from there that it's Rebbe's own opinion that you're chayiv for helim tumah as well as helim mikdash, and therefore when the Mishnah says that Yediyas Hatuma Shtayim Shein Arba, that is actually the opinion of Rebbe himself. Zok the Gemara, Ashkechon b'Yediyas de'islei Taimid denafshe. Okay, fine, very well. So we just proved that it's Rebbe's own opinion that by Yediyas Hatuma, he says Shtayim Shein Arba, by Korban Olav Yored. Shevuos this leitamid denafshe min olam. How do we know that also by Shevuos Shtayim Shein Arba for Korban Olav Yored? That is also his own opinion and not just the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Svaru, well, it's logical. Why is it logical? Well, Rabbi Akiva, my time, how come Rabbi Akiva holds that by Shevuos Shtayim Shein Arba for Korban Olav Yored? Rabbi Akiva, my time, called Michayev Lisha Over. How come Rabbi Akiva says that not only are you chayiv a korban olav yored for ochal v'lo ochal, but also the shaver, also for achalti v'lo achalti. T'darish ribuye umiute. Chevre, we've seen a bunch of times in Babylon Talmud, klal ufrat uchlal versus riboy umiut v'riboy. Okay, we're going to get more into it today. Okay, yeah, we're going to get into it more soon. Okay, what does it mean that Rabbi Akiva includes Lishe'ovar because he learns Ribuye Umi'ute? So this isn't actually the Gemara, but Rashi tells us that Rashi says in Dibra Mashchil, Tidash Ribuye Umi'ute. I'm kind of going to jump around inside the Rashi, so just bear with me for a minute. Well, the truth is, we can really just read the pasuk. We don't really need the Rashi. Forget it. We don't really need the Rashi. We could just look at the pasuk. Although the pasuk isn't in the Gemara, I'm just going to read the pasuk for you. O nefesh ki si shava. That's a reboard. Any type of shvua. Levate b'sosayim lehara o lehetiv. Lehara o lehetiv is a miut. So now the way that riboy umiut works is at first you have the riboy that includes everything, right? When it says o nefesh ki si shava, any type of shvua, whatever it might be. And then when we say lahara lehetiv, so if you say klal ufrat, then what lahara lehetiv would mean that it's literally only those kinds of shvuas, like ochal v'lo ochal. That's it. Right, the prat is defining the klal, but this isn't klal ufrat. This is ribuye umiute. So in ribuye umiute, in ribuye umiut, so you have the klal, right? O nefesh ki si shava, any type of shavua, and then when you have the hara lehetiv, it's not defining what we're talking about. Rather, it's coming to include things similar to what we're talking about. So therefore, when it says lahara lehetiv, it's not only ochal v'lo ochal, but it's all types of shvuos that are in the future. It's all types of shvuos that are in the future. And then when it says, okay, so we have the riboy, we have the miut. Okay, so first we had the ribui, all types of Shevuos. Then we had the miut to say lahara ulahetiv. We're including all things that are similar to lahara ulahetiv, which are in the future. And then when it says l'chol asher yivate adam b'shvua, and any type of Shevuah, so now it's another ribui, right? We had the ribui of Onefesh Kisi Shava, any type of Shevuah, but then it says Lahar Lehetiv, a specific type of Shevuah. But then it says L'chol Asher Yivate Adam B'Shvuah. Once again, we're opening it up to say, okay, fine, you know what? We're going back to including all types of Shevuos, even L'Sha'avar, right? All right, Ribui Umiut Uribui. We're coming to include all types of Shevuos again, whether it's Lahar Lehetiv, whether it's any type of Shevuah in the future, or whether it's even the Sha'avar, Achalti velo Achalti. So then, but when you have the Miut, or when you have Riboy, Miut, Riboy, the Miut still doesn't just get overwritten and ignored, it still serves a purpose in that it limits one thing. It's just coming to limit one thing, B'Yotzei. What's the one thing that it comes to limit? Shvuah l'kayim is a mitzvah, I believe. No, the opposite. Nishba levatel is a mitzvah. When it's mitzvah levatel is a mitzvah, so then that is excluded. But otherwise, it comes to include all other shvuas, whether it's ochal v'lo ochal, whether it's achalti v'lo achalti. They are all included in korban ole v'yored, according to Rabbi Akiva, because his perspective is that we learn ribui umiut rather than klal ufrat. So again, Rabbi Akiva, my time, I'm back in the Gemara. Kamechayev lisha avar. How come Rabbi Akiva holds that korban olav yored applies not just to le'arar or lehetiv, not just to the future, but also lisha avar, also to achalti v'lo didarsh ribui umute? Because Rabbi Akiva, his perspective is that when you have this kind of a framework, the tool to use is ribui umiut. It is not klal ufrat. And guess what? Rebbe Nami darish ribui umiute. That is also Rebbe's perspective, that when you have this scenario, you use ribui umiut rather than klal ufrat, and therefore Rebbe would arrive at the same conclusion as Rabbi Akiva, that Shevuos Shtayim Shein Arba for korban ole v'yored. And that is how we know that it's Rebbe's own opinion that Shevuos Shtayim Shein Arba for korban ole v'yored. Tanya, how do we know that Rebbe's opinion generally is ribui umiut versus klal ufrat? The Tanya that we learn in the Brayso, Rebbe Yomi says, Rebbe bakol podin bechor adam. If a person has a baby, okay? So now here's the interesting thing, okay? Shimon lent Shimon lent 5 selas to Reuven, okay? Now 5 selas is the amount that of pigeon bechor. So Shimon lent 5 selas to Reuven, and Reuven wrote a document to Shimon that says, I, Reuven, owe you, Shimon, 5 selas. Shimon has a baby, Mazel Tov, firstborn, Ben Zachar, Bechor, Ben HaBechor, and he needs to do a pidyon haben. So he goes to a Kohen, his name is Levi. He goes to Levi the Kohen, and he says, Levi, I want to redeem my son from you. Here is my shtar that says that Reuven owes me 5 selas. Here, take this shtar. Reuven now owes you 5 selas. So instead of me giving you 5 selas, I'll give you a document that's and I'll be poda my son with that. So now says Rebbe Omer Bakel Peidin Becher Adam Chutz Min Ashtaris. So Rebbe says, look, while you can use just about anything to redeem your firstborn son, you cannot, however, use a document. You can't use a shtar. You can't be poda your son with a shtar. V'Rabbanan Amrei Bakol Peidin Bechor Adam Chutz Me Avodim V'Shtaros V'Karkos. The Rabbanan have a more exhaustive list. They say you can be poda, right? Shimon can be poda his son with anything, but not with shtaros, but also not with avodim and not with karkos, not with property. My time with the Rebbe, how come Rebbe says you can be poda with anything, just not shtaris? Darish ribuye umiyute, because he darshins ribuy and miut. Ufduyoy mi ben chodesh, that when the pasuk says that the firstborn is redeemed at a month, riba, okay, it's a ribuye, a ribuy. Be podim with anything. Be'ercha kesef chamesh shkalim, that's a miut. And then tifte, chazer, v'riba, that's a second ribuy. Riba umiet v'riba, there was a ribuy, a miut, and a ribuy. Riba hakol, it comes to include anything. You can be poda with anything. My riba kol mile, it includes everything. My miet, what was excluded, what is the miut come? What purpose does the miut serve? Miet shtaris, to simply exclude shtaris, and that is why Rabbi says you cannot be poda your son with a shtar. But other than that, you can use anything. So we see that Rabbi holds riboy umiut, as opposed to v'rabbanan darshe klale ufrate, whereas the rabbis darshan klal ufrat. Ufduyo mi ben chodesh klal, redeem your child at 1 month. That's sort of redeem with anything. That's a klal. Be'ercha kesef chamesha shkalim prat. But then it says 5 shkalim, 5 shekels. So it's only 5 shekels, right? Klal ufrat. The prat is coming to define the klal only with 5 shekels. Tifte. But then when it says tifte, chazer v'chalal, you now have another klal ufrat uchlal. And then what that does is iyatadon elikein ha prat. So when you have a klal ufrat uchlal, the second klal comes to include not just the prat, but anything similar to the klal. Basically, the same thing as the miut does for riboy umiut. The klal ufrat, right? Basically, where you get to with riboy and miut without another riboy is where you get to with a klal ufrat uchlal. And therefore, ma'aprat meforish davra metaltel v'gufo mammon, just like the prat. 5 shekels is something that is movable, and it is money. It itself is money. So you can be poda your son with anything that is movable and is itself money. Yotzu karkos, to the exclusion of property. She'enim metaltalin. You can't. It's not movable. Yotzu avodim shukshul karkos. It also excludes avodim because avodim are compared to karkos. Yotzu shtaris. And also it excludes stars because even though they're movable, ein gufan mamun, they themselves aren't money, but they're a sort of means to collecting money, but they themselves are not worth that money, are not that money. Now, so we used this to make the argument that Rebbe's view on darshaning these kinds of psukim is that of riboy umiut rather than klal ufrat, and since Rebbe's view is a riboy umiut view, he would use the same perspective when it comes to Shevuos to say that a korban olav yored is for not just lehaba ocha v'lo ocha, but also l'sha'avar achalti v'lo achalti. But amalei Ravina la meimar, Ravina asa meimar Rebbe darish ribuye umiute. Is that really true? That Rebbe's perspective is that you always dash and ribuy umiut? For Rebbe klale ufrate darish. Rebbe dashins klal ufrat, not ribuy umiut. The Tanis when in a brisa, when it comes to a doorman, who knows what a doorman is? A doorman is an Eved Ivri who decides after 6 years that he wants to ahavti as, was it ahavti es adoni es ishti es bonai lo eitzei, something like that. So vigisho adono vel adelet vel mezuzah, right? Something like that. So his adon goes and he nails him to the doorpost by his ear. And the joke that I like to make at Babylon Talmud is it doesn't say that he takes the nail out and therefore he's stuck there forever and he's a doorman. Anyways, the Tanya that the pasuk, Rashi points out, the pasuk says v'lakachta, that's that first klal / ribuy, and then it says martzeya, a nail. Ainli, Elamartseya. All I know is that he could nail his ear into the door. Minayin laharbo l'rabos hasol v'asira v'amachad v'amakadeach v'amachatev v'amachtev. I don't know. How do you know to include all these other types of things that you could, sharp objects that you can hammer through his ear? So Tamalama v'lakachta kol davar shenilkach bayad Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda says, well, anything, right? It says v'lakachta again, right? So you have, okay, so again it says v'lakachta, and then anything that is taken by your in your hand. Wait, where's this where's Gimel? What's Gimel? Beis Gimel. V'lakachta samatzev v'nasata ba'ozno v'adelos v'ayilachal eved olam afla moscha taise kain. Wait, but then where's the second? Wait, what? Wait, where am I? V'lakachta kol davar shenilkach bayad. Okay, wait 1 second. And then it says, and then it also says vinasata. So there's v'lakachta, there's matzev, and it says vinasata. So that's klal ufrad uklal, or riboy miut riboy. Okay. Kol davar shenilkach bayad, and it's anything taken by in your hand. Div Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yomi says, Rabbi Martzeya, ma Martzeya miyuchad b'shamateches, have kol davar shamateches. Okay, so Rabbi says, Dafke, we're talking about metal things, not other types of like wooden splinters and things. But my kamifage, we say, what's the machlokas? Rabbi darish klali ufrate, Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda darish ribuya miite, and we say, well, the difference between Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda is that Rabbi is darshaning as ribuy, as klal ufrat, whereas Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda is darshaning as ribuy umiut. So we see that actually Rabbi's position seems to be, at least by the doorman, klal ufrat. So the Gemara says, in ba'ama klal ufrate darish. You know what? You're right. Generally, Rabbi's perspective is actually klal ufrat. So now do we explain pidyon aben? V'ocha by pidyon aben, hainu time. This is why he darshans ribuy umiut. Kidatanu devei Rabbi Yishmael, datanu devei Rabbi Yishmael. Bamoyim shnei paimim. What's this? This is a pasuk by the fish that you're allowed to eat. It says, "Ezet toichlu mikol asher bamoyim, kol asher snapi v'kaskeses bamoyim, bayamu v'ancholim osum tochelu." So it says bamoyim is a klal slash ribui, and it says bamoyim a second time, which is another klal slash ribui. But then it says bayam v'ancholim, which is a miut. Now, what's interesting over here slash prat. What's interesting here is that the two klal slash reboys, I'm just going to call them klal just so for simplicity, the two klals are right next to each other. It's not a klal ufrat uklal, it's a klal uchlal, it's not a klal ufrat uklal, it's a klal uchlal ufrat. So what do you do in that scenario? So the Tana of Rabbi Yishmael, bamoyim shnei paimim, ein ze klal ufrat ela riba umiyeh. That when you have a scenario like this, says Rabbi Yishmael, that you have a klal and then a klal, and the prat only comes after the second klal. So you don't darshan as a klal ufrat uchlal, you darshan it as a riboy umiut v'riboy. And that is why, and the same thing is by pidyon aben. If we look at the pasuk by pidyon aben, what does it say? Ufduyo miben chodesh tifte kerk chomesh kesef shkalim b'shekel hakodesh kesef chamesh shkalim b'shekel hakodesh esem gerahu. So we see ufduyo and tifte, and then only afterwards the prat of 5 shekels, and that is why. So Rebbe holds like Rabbi Yishmael there, that therefore it would be darshan as a ribu imiud versus a klal ufrat. Rabbanan Amar, whereas the rabbis say, Amar Ravina, according to the rabbis, says Ravina, Kida Amri, my Rav, it's like the saying, it's so Komokum Shatamotze Shtei Klalos Hasmuchas Elazet, that in a scenario like this, where you have klal and then a klal and then a prat, no problem. Hatal prat beineim v'dunam klal ufrat. Just take that prat at the end and just shift it over so that it's now in between the two klals, and you could just still darshan it as klal ufrat klal. But now says the Gemara, hashta da amrit Rebbe klal ufrate darish. Okay, so this is all to say that Rebbe's perspective is actually klal ufrat, and the only reason by pidyon aben he says ribu miut is because the two klals are next to each other, and the prat is after it. But generally, Rebbe would hold klal ufrat. So if that's the case, then going back to our case of Shevuos, so Rabbi Akiva says shtaim shein arba for korban olav yored because he says riboy umiut, and therefore it even applies the sha'avar. But we're saying that Rebbe's opinion is not, his perspective is not generally riboy umiut, it's klal ufrat. Well, if that's the case, then how would we know to include even the sha'avar? Because with klal ufrat uchla, you're only going to get lahaba. So says the Gemara, ele b'shvuos. So where am I? So hashta the Amrit Rebbe klal ufrat darish bal korchech kasher shvuos. Ele b'shvuos nasav ali b'dar b'kiv leilo svirle. So actually, when it comes to shvuos time shein arba, that is not Rebbe's opinion. He's quoting the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rebbe actually does not hold that way because Rebbe himself would hold klal ufrat uchlal, and therefore it would only be lahaba for korban olav yored, not l'sha'avar. So therefore, when we say shtaim shein arba, it's dafka the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, but that is not Rebbe's opinion. Cheved, that was daf dalid of Masechta Shevuos. Oof, wow, that's gewaldig, a little bit intense, but gewaldig. We continued fleshing out the opinions of Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva. We kind of dropped the perspective that we're talking about makis by Shevuos and by Yediyas Atuma, and we're talking about instead korban olav yored, and we said that it's davka Rebbe's opinion, and Rebbe himself holds by Yediyas Atuma shtaim shein arba. But when it comes to Shevuos, it's tak according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, but he wouldn't necessarily appear that that wouldn't be his opinion. We got into klal ufrat, ribu umiut, interesting things. Peace out.